Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Labour Market Transformation Update webinar. Really pleased you could join us on this sunny August day. Today we're covering yesterday's update that we published, and that update, like today's webinar, is a real chance to bring together in one place the progress that we've made in the last quarter across our labour market transformations. In today's session, and we might just usefully go to the next slide on the agenda, we're going to have a real focus on the Transformed Labour Force Survey and the results of our readiness assessment in July. And that starts off the agenda today. And I'll be passing to Matt Hughes, who's our Deputy Director for Social Surveys Transformation, to tell us all about that. We're then going to move on to the latest quality assessment of the Labour Force Survey, where I'll hand to my colleague David Freeman, who is one of the co-deputy directors for the Labour Market Division. And then we're going to move on to the plans for household socioeconomic and local statistics, including how we'll support our users in that going forward. And Jay Lindop, our Deputy Director for Population User Needs, will be there to take us through that one. If we move on to the next slide, because you'll have seen that after that we'll be opening up to questions and answers. How will you ask those questions? Well, we'll be using Slido to do that. So there is the Slido number, #24015. We'll also put it in the link in the chat. Please do be asking those questions throughout the session, and then we'll turn to those after we've heard from all the presenters. I should also note, as a point of housekeeping, that we'll be recording today's session and hosting it later on our YouTube channel. So there'll be that to look forward to afterwards if you want to come back and have a recap. But for now, because we've got quite a packed agenda, I'm going to hand straight over to our first presenter, and that is Matt. Matt, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Liz, and good morning, everyone. Apologies for the slightly croaky voice. I've got both some recap to remind colleagues, and in particular, if you're not familiar with the Transformed Labour Force Survey, as well as those updates that Liz kindly mentioned. So if we could go to the first slide, please, and just starting with a bit of a recap, really, just to remind people sort of what the now focus is for our transformation plans. So firstly, it's about the strategic priority. So an online first transformed labour force survey is the strategic priority. Why we need to do this is to make sure that we've got that sustainable solution to the decline in participation, the response rates and the quality issues that we're seeing across traditional surveys. Now, I know the teams are doing an incredible job trying to address the challenges in the LFS, and they're also doing very similar in other surveys. But an online first is really the route to addressing a number of those solutions. The second area is around improving survey performance. So last year we identified a number of major design change packages on the TLFS that we needed to introduce to address performance and improve quality. And in July, we introduced a shortened core version of the TLFS, and I'm going to say a little bit more about that in the slides to follow. And the third area, as Liz has already mentioned, is about the readiness assessment outcomes. So over the last few months, as the programme, we've been bringing together evidence and evaluation to conclude our first TLFS readiness assessment. That exercise took place throughout July, and it went through governance, and I can talk through sort of the outcomes again a little later in the slides. The content, the deeper content, is included in the article that we've published yesterday, and we've got links to those, and of course it will be covered at a more higher level in the slides to follow. If we can go to the next slide, please. In case you're not familiar, just on this slide, I wanted to just sort of walk people back through quickly the design of the survey. So we have two parts or two surveys on the TLFS. We have the core survey and the plus survey. So the TLFS core survey is the survey that will be used to produce the headline labour market statistics, or statistics such as the employment rate levels, unemployment, inactivity. Those will be produced from the core survey only. If you're familiar with the LFS wave structure, you'll see that the wave structure we have on the TLFS core is the same. It's that 5-wave configuration. On the TLFS, the sample size at wave 1 is 90,000 households per quarter, and that's for Great Britain. To address the longitudinal part of the survey, 45,000 of those households are selected for wave 2 and through to wave 5. On the plus survey, so the plus survey is required to meet the wider labour market and household socioeconomic and local user needs. We'll probably acronym that as HSL throughout the slides, and Jay we'll cover this a little later on. That is a single wave survey, and that has a sample size of 90,000 households also per quarter. If we can go to the next slide, please. Just to talk a little bit more about what we've done in terms of the changes to both those surveys, Core and Plus. So as I mentioned, last year, to address performance and quality issues that we identified in the programme, one of the major changes we accelerated really was to introduce a shortened version of the survey, and that was the shorter Core that went live in July. As a result, that shortened survey was to focus on headline labour market statistics. We needed to boost response and reduce missingness that we were seeing in the longer version of that survey. In addition, one of the additional modes of completion we introduced was a targeted face-to-face supported completion. So as part of the knock to nudge, difficult, hard to reach individuals who are not able to complete, we're offering an assisted completion on the doorstep. So not the same as the labour force survey where the respondent, the interviewer is completing on behalf of the respondent, but we are offering an assisted supported completion for those non-responding households in those underrepresented areas. And the reason to do that is we need to improve the representativeness across the survey and the quality of the data sets. I've talked about the longitudinal sample. The benefit of the TLFS, of course, is that we don't just provide point in time data changes, but it's about changes across time and flows over time as well. So to address and make sure that we've got quality in those flow statistics, when we introduced the shortened core survey last year, we increased the longitudinal sample from that 40,000 to 45,000, as I mentioned on the previous slide. And the final one is around data rotation, and I've got another slide on this as well, but just to sort of explain what is data rotation. Firstly, we know as a respondent, a lot of the information that people provide doesn't change through the cycle of collection. And also we know that it can be quite challenging and frustrating, if I'm being honest, having to put the same information in across your survey responses. So we've worked really hard to introduce and implement that data rotation functionality. So here, this will ensure that respondents are not asked to repeat questions unnecessarily. If the data hasn't changed, as part of the function, we're able to rotate that forward. So that's a positive impact for our respondents, and in terms of the quality and the performance we see an increase in response and a reduction in attrition. The next slide just talks about the changes to the Plus survey. Priority wise, we have focused on the core survey, but the sample across the two is the same. It also has the same offering of that targeted face-to-face supported completion. It also offers, with that 90,000 sample, large annual data sets with the opportunity to develop some quarterly data sets. And we can calibrate survey estimates in Plus with Core. Now, the last one is something that we've not done yet, but we are thinking about sort of the broader transformation that could come beyond phase one. And what we are looking to include is modularization, where certain topics on perhaps the Plus survey are only asked in certain quarters. And again, the focus there is to reduce that respondent burden. If we can go to the next slide, please. I appreciate I've already talked about this, but this was a major landmark for the TLFS. So as I mentioned last year, we identified a number of major design changes that we needed to prioritize to address the performance and the quality issues that we were seeing in the survey. So last year, we introduced that shortened core. We also introduced supported completion. And then in April this year, we went live with that data rotation functionality. We also took the opportunity, as we continue to look at the overall survey performance, to increase the incentives from £10 to £20. And that delivery in April also included some further design changes around the pay and earnings question block. If we can go to the next slide, I appreciate I've talked a lot about what we've done. I just wanted to show you already some of the emerging impacts we're seeing, the positive impacts we're seeing as a result of these design changes that we've introduced. If I start on the left-hand side, so we can see that since we've introduced data rotation and that collection of changes, including the incentive increase from April this year, we're already seeing a 2 or over a 2 percentage point increase in the return rate. So we're now at around 39.9%. And some of that will be driven by data rotation. Of course, some of it will be driven also by the increased incentives that we're seeing. It's really exciting to see in terms of the management information on the right-hand side that those completion times are coming down for those later waves as well. So for waves 2 to 5, the later waves of collection, completion times now, median are taking around 9 to 12 minutes. I know it's not a direct comparison, but on the LFS, we can sometimes be looking at completion times for the LFS survey in excess of 40, 45 minutes. So it's really good to see for those later waves of collection that we're getting much reduced completion rate times. Importantly as well, what we are seeing in the early information data is a growing number of larger households are remaining in the survey. Prior to us shortening the survey and introducing data rotation, we were seeing sizable drop-offs for those larger households. And it's great to see already that they are now remaining in these later waves of collection. If we can go to the next slide, please. And if I can just move on to the next one, just to talk about the readiness assessment. So I've mentioned over the last few months, we've been pulling together sort of an assessment that took place throughout really July this year. It really focused on a number of critical insights and indicators. Those included data quality, operational readiness, stakeholder acceptance, and there were other indicators, but just to give you sort of a flavour of the insights and the evaluation that we were looking at. We brought together that information to inform our credible forward look plan. And that forward look plan emphasized that we need to have a safe transition and a transition strategy for 2027. The second label focuses on our recommendation, which went through governance and was approved at governance, that now is not the right time to transition to the TLFS. We have introduced a number of major changes. The design methods improvements are still working their way through data collection. And as a result of that, we also accompanied that decision not to transition to say now also isn't the right time to publish those research outputs either, given the fact that we're still working through data collection that is only partially inclusive of the most recent design and method changes. We also took the opportunities in this readiness assessment to confirm what we would be looking to do as part of our next progress check. And we agreed the timing of that next progress check would be in January next year. And we would be looking to use that really as a temperature check or a program trajectory to make sure that we're on the right path for that 2027 transition. Of course, at that point, we will be pulling together further evaluation and analysis, in particular of those areas that are the increased or the heightened uncertainty in the programme at the moment. So areas that we're still working through the most challenge. Next slide, please. Just to sort of summarise really what we will be doing for the year ahead, and others will also be covering this in their slides. So I've mentioned we've introduced some major changes. Now really we're focusing on that analysis and evaluation. So it's about monitoring the effect of the major changes that we've introduced and how that's affecting the performance and the quality of the data. We'll also be prioritising and finalising our plans for the priority data sets, the core data sets that we've agreed for transition. As I mentioned, we're still holding a level of uncertainty within the programme. One particular area that we've been working hard to address is how to get good quality industry and occupation data in predominantly an online survey. The teams are working incredibly fast, and we've now stood up a large-scale test, which is looking at a search as you type functionality. So we don't have the evaluations of that yet, but we will do in readiness for that January checkpoint I mentioned. And as I mentioned, Jay will tell us a little bit more shortly about the latest HSL data and updates. And bringing all that together, we will sort of make that fuller assessment or that checkpoint assessment in January next year. But if we can go to the next slide, because I'm mindful, I appreciate people may be trying to scribble a lot of information down. This is a really useful visual, so do take it away. And if you've not had a chance to look at our blog, we have included this visual in the blog that we've also published to accompany the article. This is our transition roadmap. We're very mindful that we need to build that confidence in a phased way. And through this diagram, and I'll walk us through the top level in a moment, what we want to demonstrate is that we do have this controlled and a phased approach to reducing uncertainty. We also have a controlled way to build up that readiness assessment and evaluation so that we can deliver that high quality data. At the very top level, starting left to right on the screen, this and the next, the final quarter of this year is focusing on the reducing that uncertainty. That's pulling together the data from the latest major changes that we've introduced. It'll also be evaluating the outcomes of that large scale search as you type test that I mentioned. Quarter one next year will be about that check progress that I mentioned. And at that point, we will be looking to develop our transition plan and publish our transition plan. Quarter two next year will be about building that user readiness. Now, you'll see in this column that we flagged this is the point we potentially could publish our research outputs, and we'll be able to share more information over the coming months. But for now, that's the flag that we've identified. Quarter three, similar to the readiness assessment that we had this year, will be the readiness assessment for TLFS next year. And then in quarter four, if we are ready, we will make the transition to the TLFS headline estimates. Now, everything we would have done up until that point will be labelled as phase one of the programme. Phase one isn't the end of the programme. We have phase two, and throughout the next few months of this year and well into next year, we are now progressing the scope and the detailed planning of phase two. We'll be able to share more information early next year, but it's 2028 onwards really that we will implement phase two of our plan. If I can just go to the next slide, please. And this is the final slide for myself. So just a bit of a recap, really. Hopefully, a lot of this has already been covered. So 2027 readiness assessment. If we, based on the evaluation and the evidence, and our users, based on conversations, evaluation and evidence, are ready, then we will start the process for a November 2020 transition to the TLFS. This remains our most likely path, and hopefully the previous slide demonstrates how we will work through that confidence over the coming months and quarters. I'm sure everybody sort of appreciates the cost of dual running two large-scale household surveys is extreme. The operation itself is complex, and as a result, neither the LFS or the TLFS will actually reach their quality potentials while we continue to run both. So what our approach needs to be on the TLFS is to get the TLFS to a data quality that is acceptable and at an acceptable level for us and for our users, so that we have the confidence to turn off the LFS and the APS. One thing that's really important in terms of the narrative and the transition approach is transition needs to be seen as the start of that journey and not the end of that journey. So we do need to make sure that everybody understands that there will be further improvements after transition, and that detail will come through in the phase two plan. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Matt. Appreciate lots of information being shared there. Reminder that if you do have any questions, the Slido code is #24015. So do pop them in there and we'll come to those in the Q&A section. But for now, it's a pleasure to introduce David Freeman for the Labour Force Survey update. David, over to you, please.
Yep, good morning, everyone. So as they said, I'm David Freeman. I co-lead the Labour Market Division. So that's the area that produces the monthly labour market statistics from the LFS. And so this morning, I'm just going to take you through some information that we published as part of the transformation article, but also as part of the quality update that came out alongside the July release a few weeks ago. So you go to the next slide, please. So these are the key points from the quality update that came out in July. Firstly is around the LFS and the impact on response levels, that since we had to suspend the publication of LFS results in 2023 and reintroduce them in 2024, we see some clear improvement because of the interventions we've made. So these included going back to face-to-face interviewing, increasing survey incentives and increasing interviewer numbers. And for the first quarter this year, so the January to March quarter, response levels for wave 2 to 5 were slightly above their pre-coronavirus pandemic level, so 2019, and wave 1, so that's the first interview, was very, very close. So we had seen a big improvement in the response levels to LFS. One caveat here is because of those improvements in response, we have seen some changes in results, partly of which we might attribute to the increase in sample response rather than genuine movements. So we have been urging caution around interpreting changes for the LFS during this period, and making sure, encouraging people to use the LFS as part of our suite of labour market indicators, including administrative data and business survey data, to give that holistic view of the labour market. A few other things we covered in the quality review this month. We had a section on the single month estimates from Labour Force Survey. Our headline data is based on 3-month averages, but we do also publish data based on single month estimates. These are a bit more volatile. They're not necessarily representative, but they can give some really interesting insight into what's happening in the labour market and with the Labour Force Survey, but they need to be used in the right context. And within the article, we give some worked examples about how best to use those single month data to give those insights. Also, this month, we looked at the impact of the operational issue on the LFS, which I'll cover more about in a minute, and also the pay-as-you-earn real-time information rates, so rates based on the administrative data based on the tax system, which I'll cover more in a minute. If you can go to the next slide, please. So as part of the quality update, we also looked at the impact of the LFS operational issue, which we covered back in May. So this was an internal issue that occurred back to the end of May, beginning of June, which led to a temporary under-resourcing in LFS telephone collection. So that resulted in fewer achieved household interviewers than we would expect during this period. However, because they were primarily waves 2 to 5, so the 2nd to the 5th interviews, most of the missing records in this period have been imputed by bringing forward the previous responses for those households. So we didn't see a change in the total number of households we interviewed. However, the actual number of responses was slightly lower. In the quality article, we go through some analysis that we did on the impact that this has at the headline level. And so this showed that actually, in terms of the headline labour market estimates, so the employment, unemployment, inactivity levels and rates, the effect was minimal. But because of the way the imputation works, there was a small but noticeable effect on the estimates of average hours and the total hours worked, because we're imputing for what one of the weeks was the May half term, and we're imputing that using data from February. But overall, the effect was minimal. Internally, we've had a lessons learned review, and the conclusions of that was found out that it didn't arise from a single decision or error. It was really a fact that we're trying to do a very complex thing in dual running the LFS and the TLFS within the same environment and using the same resources. And so that is quite complex. However, we have learned some lessons, so we'll be implementing those to make sure we prevent something like this happening again. If we just go to the next slide, please. So this is just showing how the LFS estimates have been improving. So while we're developing the LFS remains the lead source of labour market data, and we have been monitoring the quality. One of the things that we have seen is that sampling variability for employment and inactivity levels has returned to the level it was pre-pandemic. So the quality of those statistics are back to where they were. And the sampling variability of the unemployment rate, which is a smaller measure, so can be a bit more volatile, is only slightly above where it was back pre-pandemic. So they've obviously increased confidence in the LFS data while we transition to the TLFS. So we can go to the next slide, please. So this is something new that we've done this month. So we always show the labour force survey as rates, so as proportion of the population. So what we've done is try to replicate that using the tax data from the pay-as-you-earn system. So we had to do a little bit of work here. We couldn't use the same population figures that we use for LFS, because LFS excludes communal establishments like halls of residence and care homes, etc. So we've had some new population data. And also we can't compare these rates directly with the LFS. LFS employment rate includes self-employment. The pay-as-you-earn data doesn't, but it does help to give us a bit of an insight. And the graph on the right shows the changes in rates by age band for the pay-as-you-earn data, showing that actually the proportion of people who are employees under the tax scheme has reduced for most age bands, but increased for elder age bands. So this is new analysis. Where we really welcome feedback from users, whether you feel this will be a useful addition to what we are currently publishing, and whether you find it useful to have this going forward. If you just go to my last slide, one thing that we did do alongside the transformation update this month was look at our accreditation of LFS and APS outputs. As you might remember, back in 2023, we removed the accredited statistics status from the APS and LFS and APS. And when we reintroduced them, they were official statistics in development while we implemented the improvements. From this month, we will move out our LFS derived labour market statistics to official statistics outputs. So we think we've done the development that we need to do and we'll carry on, but we won't be seeking re-accreditation. What we will be doing is focusing on making sure that we can make the TLFS accredited as soon as possible as we move over to being the lead measure. So rather than focusing on LFS, we're going to put our focus on TLFS and look to get that accreditation. And I think that was all I wanted to cover, so I'll hand back to Liz.
Thanks very much, David. We'll turn to our last presenter now, Jay, who's going to cover household socioeconomic and local. So Jay, over to you.
Thanks, Liz, and morning all. So as Liz said, I'm Jay. I lead a team in ONS Pure, and our focus is really understanding and prioritising user needs, which includes the HSL team, which is part of the TLFS transition. So this morning you've already heard about the TLFS programme and our latest assessment of LFS quality. So I'm just going to spend the next few minutes focusing on the HSL side. For those that don't know, the HSL project was established around a year ago because we felt we needed a sharper focus on the parts of the survey and the user community that are not primarily concerned with headline labour market statistics, but that still have a great need for LFS and APS data. Matt talked about the TLFS Plus survey, and that's my team's sort of particular interest. It's alongside the non-labour market information collected across both the core and Plus surveys. But in practice, there's no sort of completely neat dividing line between the labour market and HSL use. We know many of our users want to understand how people's economic activity interacts with things like age or disability, ethnicity, qualifications, for example. And it's those combinations and breakdowns that often provide the real value. So many of these users, the Annual Population Survey or APS is currently their main source of data, and it provides detailed demographic and socioeconomic insight between censuses. So given all of this context, the work on HSL has kind of these three connected parts that you can see here. So the first is engagement, understanding who uses the data, what they use it for, and what they genuinely need to retain through the transition. The second is analysis, looking carefully at the emerging data, assessing quality and ensuring the HSL evidence is properly represented in future readiness assessments that you've just heard quite a lot about. And the third is alternative data. So understanding what other sources might complement the survey, address known limitations, or even sort of provide additional resilience during and after the transition itself. More recently, we've also strengthened the project by adding more explicit focus on the experience of APS users. And I think that's really important because this isn't simply a technical change from one survey to the other. For users, it's a change to that wider statistical system that they rely on for sort of policy or future funding, for example. If we can move to the next slide. So as I say, there's sort of two new areas where we're also putting additional focus. This first one is about giving users greater clarity and confidence about what the future statistical system will look like. That's kind of part of that phase 2 that Matt also talked about. We know that simply saying that TLFS will replace existing surveys isn't enough, and that users need to understand what will replace the APS in real practical terms. You know, which future data sets and outputs will meet which user needs, and what will it be available quarterly or annually, what breakdowns will be possible, and where the future offer may look different from today's. So we're working to define that future sort of offer like clearly, and to really get into the detail and map the current APS outputs against the future TLFS-based system. So alongside that, we're identifying and assessing alternative or complementary data sources that could help support users during that transition as well, as I said. The second area is success criteria. As Matt talked through, the labour market programme already has a clear set of considerations for readiness, and we're developing an aligned set for HSL. And these will help move us beyond a general judgment that the data looks reasonable and towards a structured assessment of whether it meets the needs of users who depend on it. So that way, the HSL evidence will then feed directly into future readiness assessments, the aim being to ensure that the decision on transition reflects the breadth of the current LFS and APS user base, not just those that are interested in the headline market statistics. So one of the things our engagement has reinforced is just how varied the use and impact of the LFS and APS data is. At one end, the data has like this direct strategic influence across government. I'm sure many of you know it can shape national policy choices and the way departments understand particular groups or places. but it's also widely used as an evidence base for decision making, monitoring and evaluation. Some uses are linked to statutory or formal reporting requirements as well, and they can be especially important, my light's gone off, because users may need data with particular definitions or breakdowns. There's then a broader category where the data provides indirect support to policy and reporting, and the APS might be part of that sort of larger analytical process and input to another output, or even be one source events amongst several. And finally, there are uses where the policy impact is limited, emerging, or not yet entirely clear, and it's that full breadth that we're trying to understand. And the point of showing you this range isn't to sort of rank the users as important and some as unimportant. It's really to understand the consequences of change. We know that a small user community might have a critical statutory use, while a larger community user community may be just using the data more generally for context, and they may equally be as important. So we're really trying to get beneath that simple question of why and whether somebody uses the APS, what decisions does it support, which variables and breakdowns matter, and what would happen if those weren't available, and are there credible alternatives. And it's that fuller picture that's helping us to prioritise the analysis, shape the future data offer, and have more meaningful conversations with users about transition. Thanks, you've already moved on. So we've also asked users how they decide whether data is actually good enough for their purposes. The answer is there's no single measure of quality. I'm sure that won't be a surprise to any of you, and that users tend to bring in several considerations together. So what we have learned, unsurprisingly, is that sample size and suppression are central. An estimate may exist in theory, but if the sample is too small or the result is suppressed, it probably can't be used for that intended analysis. Precision and uncertainty are closely linked with that, of course, and their tolerance for uncertainty may also depend on the decisions that our users are trying to make. Of course, stability over time matters as well. A lot of our users are interested in trends, so they need the confidence that movements in the data reflect something that's actually happening in the population rather than unexpected changes in the survey or production process. Comparability and validation are obviously another important part of the picture. And then there's the breakdowns themselves, which I've already touched on. I think for many HSL users, a national total has a limited value. There's particular need we've found to analyse geographical areas or small population groups, and sometimes do those in combination. And that's one of the reasons the annual person level dataset is so important to our assessment overall for the TLFS programme. Users also want transparency. They need clear flags, warnings, quality information, so they can make informed judgments rather than be given a simple statement about whether the data is good or bad. And finally, there's fitness for use. So formal thresholds and quality measures are essential, but they absolutely don't remove the need for expert judgment. And it's these findings that are shaping the success criteria that I mentioned on my previous slide, because they give us a more grounded way of assessing readiness based on how users actually make decisions about quality. This final slide brings together where the analysis has got to and where we're headed next. So it's a little bit complicated, but hopefully I'll talk through it, and then as someone said, I think the slides will be shared. So our understanding of the HSL data is developing continuously as more quarters become available and as the data sets mature. More recently, we've started working with annual weighted data, whereas much of our earlier work was based on the quarterly data sets, which is what we had available at the time. And that annual evidence is particularly important because it's much closer to the type of data that many current APS users rely on. At this stage, there's no red items emerging from HSL analysis that could potentially delay transition, all that sort of stuff that Matt talked through. But I will caveat that by saying it's really too early to make an absolute statement. But as it stands right now, we've not identified anything within HSL that would clearly warrant delaying transition if the labour market evidence supports proceeding. So we're not seeing any issues in TLFS Plus, for example, that are completely separate from issues that have been talked through today that we've seen in TLFS Core, or for topics that appear on both surveys. And of course, we would always expect some statistical differences between the two, which will need to be understood and explained. And that's really what leads up to the 4 priorities for the next phase of the analysis. So first, we will sustain and deepen the analysis as additional quarters and annual data become available, and that's already kicked off in earnest this month. And that's not a one-off data quality check. We need to see whether findings remain stable over time, of course, and follow up anything that needs further investigation. Second, we will evaluate the annual person level data, and that'll be a critical part of the evidence for assessing readiness to move from the current APS to an APS style data set based on TLFS microdata. Third, we're going to extend the coverage beyond the initial priority topics, including areas where earlier analysis was limited because weights were not available. And fourth, we'll maintain active engagement with users and topic experts, and that's absolutely crucial. So really keen to hear any feedback from today as well. And we'll continue sharing findings through our expert groups, testing our interpretation and using that feedback to direct further work. Sorry, that was a lot of information. So to sum up, the overall message is one, I think, of measured progress. We've been going about a year and lots has been done in that time, lots more still to come. The evidence is developing, and as I said, we've not found any clear HSL blockers as yet, although there's still time for that. But we're hopeful that what we're seeing so far is a really good indication that there are no blockers. And the annual data gives us a much stronger basis for that next stage of analysis as well. But we still need to complete it, agree with what success looks like, and provide users with a clear account of what that future system will offer. I think I'll hand back to you, Liz.
Yes, thanks very much, Jay, and thanks to all presenters. We've now reached the Q&A time. Thanks for those of you who have already submitted questions. If you haven't and you've got a burning one, then a reminder that the Slido code is 24015. I will ask the questions and draw in my colleagues who can help answer them. So kicking off and follows very nicely from your presentation, Jay, given the quality issues with the APS at a local level, what is being done to ensure the TLFS provides robust estimates at a local level?
Yeah, a very reasonable question and very pertinent at the moment. And it kind of just fits in with all that analysis that I was just talking about, really. As we start to get that annual data weighted coming through, we're working really closely with our subnational and local teams and with our local users. And actually, we're in a phase of engagement right now, which is very focused on engaging with the local users to understand their needs. And we will then feed that through to the analysis that we do.
Great, thanks very much, Jay. A question now, I think, for you, David, and it's about the RTI data that you presented. And the question that by age would be really useful if they could have it by local authority. That's to help support a policy focus on supporting young people into work.
I think that's a really good question. We do produce quite a lot of data from the RTI. The current way the current publication works is that HMRC do the analysis and then pass the data over to us to publish. We do the total employees by local authority on a 3-monthly basis. To do the by age, in theory, it's possible, but we'd have to work with HMRC to say, can we make that part of the regular production? So I will take that one away and talk to colleagues in HMRC to see what would be possible and on what sort of time scale. But I think really good, will be really good to have it. Great, thanks very much, David. Now going to turn to a question on the timetable, and Matt, I think this is one for you. And this is about kind of the clarity about what actually is happening when TLFS transitions. So if it transitions in November 2027, what does that actually mean in terms of the survey?
Yep, no problem. So if the decision in the July Readiness Assessment 2027 is to transition, then we will walk through a sequence of plans that includes implementing labour market statistics on a TLFS basis from November 2027. So exactly as the colleague has written the question, really, that if we do have that readiness decision in July, we will implement TLFS labour market statistics on a TLFS basis from November 2027 onwards.
Great, thanks, Matt. And I might stick with you for another question about the sort of comparison between LFS and TLFS. And the question was, given the improved performance of the LFS, is it reasonable to say we should not expect materially all different estimates of the unemployment rate between the LFS and TLFS?
So I haven't got a definite answer right now. I think these are exactly the types of analysis questions that the teams are working through. They're looking at a wide range of analysis really to see and understand the differences that we're seeing. And I think that will form part of those research outputs that I mentioned. So I think what we will be planning to do is to prioritize the analysis, but actually the impacts and differences will be presented in some of those research outputs that we mentioned that we're looking to introduce from next year onwards.
Great, thank you very much. I might turn back to Jay now. A question on, will there be a consultation on the future offer of the household socioeconomic and local work?
So we haven't completely ruled that out. We've got a couple of more stages to go on our engagement. So at the moment, it's a bit confusing because we're also calling it phase 2, but talking to our local users, as I said, and doing an informal consultation. But once we've got through all that engagement and once we've done our analysis and we've done that mapping from the current variables, APS and LFS to HSL, we will then think about whether we need to do a formal consultation at that point. So I can't answer that right now, but it's something that we're still considering.
Great, thank you very much. And turning back, I think, to you, Matt, and employment analysis by industry, will people see an improvement there? And has the move to SIC 2026 been considered in the programme?
So in terms of the analysis by industry, the honest answer is it's too early to say. I think I mentioned in my slides, one of the biggest areas of challenge and uncertainty we're holding in the programme is in the quality of industry and occupation data. The teams are working at an incredible pace to try and identify a package of solutions, if I'm being honest. The large-scale tests now, the search as you type test, will have findings later this year. So perhaps around about sort of January onwards time or Q1 next year, we should be able to come back and give more of a firm answer in terms of the improvements we could or may not be seeing in some of those categories like analysis by industry. The short answer in terms of SIC 2026, yes. The project on SIC SOC are completely docked in with the classification changes, and they're working very closely in parallel with those teams to understand what, in terms of the classification framework, will need to change as a result of the 2026 updates.
Great, thank you, Matt. And I think we're sticking with you for another TLFS question. This is that one of the previous TLFS updates found that shorter phone interviews led to some misunderstanding of questions, potentially inflating inactivity rates and deflating self-employment rates. Has this been corrected? And does TLFS have a lower rate of proxy replies for younger cohorts?
So it might be one I need to take away. I don't know the detail about that specific question. So rather than hold the floor, let me take that one away and do some fact finding, and I'll get back to the colleague.
Yeah, great. And we can provide that response after the meeting. Thanks, Matt. Another question on the TLFS is around the microdata and when it may become available from the UK Data Service.
So as part of the TLFS, we've got a TLFS transition and an LFS decommission work package, and all this information is being worked through at the moment. So we don't have a specific timeline, but just to give a nod that actually microdata and becoming available on the data service is something that's included in that work stream. So as we get a fuller understanding of that package, we'll be able to give more information in terms of the timeline and when you can expect to receive it.
Great, thank you very much. And I think also one for you, Matt. It's perhaps a similar point to the point where you were asked about the comparison between unemployment rates between LFS and TLFS, but an interest this time in health outcomes. And I imagine your answer may be quite similar.
I was going to suggest, rather than just sort of hold the floor, I'm more than happy to take some of the analysis questions away. I'm mindful that lots of people will be interested. I can sweep a few of these up and take them away and provide a more detailed response to people. But I'm pretty confident we've got a comprehensive analysis team working through not just the aggregates, but the granular level. So I will get back to you with everything we have in this space.
I think on that one, if I just jump, oh, sorry, Liz.
Oh, please do, yeah.
But I was just going to say on the health outcomes, we are looking at that as part of the HSL project, and we're meeting with stakeholders to share how the data compares, so working with them.
No, great, thank you. And we are actually reaching the end of time now. So we've got a few questions that we haven't got to yet, but they are both in the analytical space. So what we will do is when we get in touch post this webinar with the recording, we'll also have supply the answers to the remaining questions. Obviously a brief chance now, if you haven't put your question in, please do so, and we'll be able to bring that together in the response as well. Also hugely appreciate that we've given a lot of information both in yesterday's update and the associated publications and in today's webinar. Maybe that you want to have a bit of a chance to reflect on some of that material. What we have got in the chat is also the email address that you can get in touch if you've got any further thoughts or questions. So please do, if you have sort of reflections after this webinar and there's things that you want to go into in more detail. We'll continue with our quarterly updates and with webinars alongside those updates so that you can ask any additional questions. But of course, really happy to take any further feedback as our plans continue to progress. So look, thank you very much everyone for joining today. Thanks for asking all the questions you did. We'll be in touch post the webinar with answers to any of the questions that we didn't get to today. And if you've still got a little short opportunity now to ask any final ones that occur to you, but also after the event, please get in touch by email if there's anything that we can help with. Thanks again, and my thanks to all the presenters today too. Thanks everyone.